Hello, everyone that's joining in. Good morning. We're glad you're able to join us today. I'm just going to give about a minute or so to allow people to get on, because I know sometimes it takes a second to get through all the processes online. So while I am waiting for folks to get on, I will just kind of do a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you again for joining in to learn more about jumpstarting your program-wide plan for preschool inclusion. I am your host, Carrie Kennengeiser, and I'm the program coordinator for South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion. I also have Heather Gouge with me, who is our principal investigator on this project. There she is. And she's also the director for the South Carolina Child Care Inclusion Collaborative. And she will be working in the background if you have anything in the chat or anything with Q&A. So she will be there to kind of help facilitate that. And we are recording this session so that folks that miss out on it right now are able to access it later on our YouTube channel. So good morning and thank you. I see lots of good morning in the chat. Just a quick note about the chat. If you'd like to put something in the chat that everyone can see, not just Heather and I, you can scroll down to the bottom. It'll say to, and in blue, it might just say panelists. If you click on that, you can change it to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see, like if you had a resource or something. So I'm just gonna move that chat out of the way. And I think people might trickle in. I'm dropping things, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And Heather, can't see the chat right now, so if there's anything that you see in there, feel free to just pop up and let me know.
Will do.
Thank you. So during this hour, we're gonna talk about a little bit about what preschool inclusion is and why now, because I always like to ground the presentations in that. Then we'll discuss what program readiness really looks like for preschool inclusion. We'll talk about some supports that are available to help your program plan for high quality early childhood inclusion. And then we'll think about what's next. So right now, you might be sitting at your computer, whether you're working from home, whether you're working in a school district or early childhood program. You might be there wondering, man, it's not even Friday. Inclusion is overwhelming, Carrie. Where do I even start? I'm not so sure about this. Or maybe you're wondering, inclusion in early childhood sounds kind of complicated, but I'm really curious and I definitely want to learn more about what I can do to increase inclusive opportunities and to plan for high quality early childhood programming. Or maybe you already have some knowledge regarding preschool inclusion. Maybe you've worked in inclusive settings or you've implemented some evidence-based practices to support all children, or you're familiar with some frameworks for supporting early childhood inclusion. You're really ready, but you want some support in moving forward with your plan to put all those pieces together. Or maybe you're sitting there wondering when I'll stop doing this check-in so we can really get down to the meat of this presentation. You're pumped, you're knowledgeable, and you're really ready for preschool inclusion. And wherever you are this morning, that's okay. Including kiddos with disabilities can feel overwhelming and it can feel complicated. There's not a one-size-fits-all model or strategy. However, there's a ton of research in this area, and there are many evidence-based practices and strategies to support the successful inclusion of young children with disabilities. So before I get started, I'd love to do just a quick temperature check of how you're feeling today. I'm gonna pop a poll up. You should see it on your screen. If you'll just let us know how you're feeling right now in this moment about preschool inclusion. Thank you. Looks like most of you have participated in the poll. I'll leave it up for another 10 seconds or so. Great, thank you so much. So it looks like the majority of you are really ready and interested in moving forward, perhaps with some guidance. And there's some of you that are a bit unsure, but you definitely want to learn more. So I'm so glad that you tuned in today, because wherever you are, you're definitely going to learn something new to help you move forward in your planning. So first, what do we mean by early childhood or preschool inclusion? I'm betting that a lot of you already know this. There is a joint position statement that came from the Division for Early Childhood, or DEC, and NACI, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, back over 10 years ago now, that highlights 3 key principles of early childhood inclusion that need to be utilized collectively to identify high quality early childhood programs and services, and their access, participation, and supports. And each element is really defined in that joint position statement. And access is obviously providing access to a wide range of learning opportunities, activities, settings, and environments. And it's a defining feature of high quality early childhood inclusion. Participation, we know that some children will need some additional individualized accommodations and supports to participate fully in play and learning activities with peers and adults. So we want to make sure we're using a range of instructional approaches to promote that engagement in play and learning, and a sense of belonging for every kiddo. And supports. We need an infrastructure of system level supports to be in place that really undergird the efforts of individuals and organizations providing inclusive services to kids and families. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but professional development, shared training, scheduling, and again, we'll get more into that in a moment. Or my favorite definition of early childhood inclusion, human beings treating other human beings like human beings. This is the most simply put, and this is borrowed from Aaron Hall, who is the director of programs for the National Inclusion Project. Right? We all just want to be treated like human beings. And if we get on board with this, we know that everyone can make a friend, everyone can participate, and everyone can be successful. So why do we do this? Well, there's, again, a ton of research in this area. And if you are interested in learning more about some of the research and policy, please feel free to connect with me or look at our website. I'd be happy to share more specifics with you. But we know that preschool inclusion improves kindergarten readiness and later school success. And we know that inclusion now in early childhood programs really sets a trajectory across of inclusion across the entire life course. So kids with disabilities, including those with really the most significant disabilities and the highest needs, can make significant development and learning progress in inclusive settings. So it's good for kids with disabilities, it's good for kids without disabilities, it's good for families, and it's just good for the community. So what is program readiness? Well, I really love this quote from some of the leading researchers in the field. And through some of my work with schools and with early learning programs, Oftentimes I hear from well-meaning folks who say things along the lines of, but I don't know, Heather just really isn't ready for that class. So my question is, what does that mean? What does it take to be ready? If I'm a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or maybe a 5-year-old who's not yet in kindergarten, what does it take for me to be ready to be with other kids my age, other 3 or 4-year-olds, right? The primary goal for early childhood programs is helping kids to be prepared for kindergarten, right? To be prepared for school age. And that is learning social skills, identifying emotions, working on self-regulation, making friends, understanding emotions in others. So all little kids are working on this. So how am I helping young kids with disabilities? By taking them out of that setting, right? By isolating them and segregating them and not providing them the access to their peers and to the general education curriculum. So it's imperative that we really flip this thinking. It's not about kids being ready for inclusion. What can we as the adults, as the programs and schools do to prepare to meet the needs of all of our learners? We're going to talk about that. The first place to really start is thinking about if your program is good quality, right? We know that preschool inclusion can take place in a variety of settings: state-funded preschool programs, Head Start classrooms, childcare centers, private programs, faith-based programs, school settings, family childcare, right? All of these settings can implement inclusion. And regardless of where inclusion occurs, each setting should meet standards for high quality care and education. There are standards that were developed by NAEYC, and they enable programs to seek national accreditation, which is an index for program quality in early childhood. Programs that meet state-driven QRIS, or quality rating improvement systems, demonstrate a level of quality likely to yield favorable outcomes for kids, right? In our state, that's ABC quality. Some of these indicators are as follows: relationships, right? We know these programs recognize that kids benefit from positive relationships with peers and adults. Curriculum. A program's curriculum should be intentionally addressing 5 domains of development: social, emotional, physical, language, and cognitive. Teaching. Programs are encouraging the use of instructional approaches that have been shown effective in promoting early learning and development, right? These approaches are considering kids' development and their cultural and linguistic diversity. We're also thinking about interests, learning preferences, and needs of each of our students. Assessment of child progress, having both formal and informal ways to make informed decisions about how to best guide children's learning. Health, efforts to protect the safety and health of both kids and staff. Teachers, having qualified teachers. Families, we know that families play a really important role. Community relationships, which we'll talk more about. Physical environment, both indoor and outdoor environments are safe and appropriate and well-maintained. And leadership and management. Again, a strong infrastructure, including strong leaders, are in place to really support staff and implement policies. So as we switch gears to really looking at indicators for inclusive programs, what you'll see is a lot of overlap with these indicators where we're just talking about early childhood quality, because good quality is the best place to start when we're thinking about indicators for high quality inclusion. Now, the tool that I'll be using to talk about indicators for high quality inclusion was designed as a guide for parents as they seek quality inclusive early childhood programs for their kiddos, and for educators responsible for providing quality inclusive programs. And this is the Quality Inclusive Early Childhood Programs 10 Things to Look For list. And it poses 10 questions to ask about a program, and it provides a list of corresponding characteristics of a quality inclusive program. And the very first one is, does your program have a philosophy or a mission for inclusive practices? And this might kind of sound like, well, we're always talking about missions and visions, but the most frequently reported barrier to early childhood inclusion has actually remained largely unchanged over the past several decades, and that's attitudes and beliefs. So the biggest barrier has been these false beliefs and these negative attitudes that were really influenced by some misinformation on the feasibility of inclusion and the fear of the unfamiliar, stereotyping of kids with disabilities, and really resistance to change. So the biggest one has just been this lack of awareness of the benefits of inclusion. So any effort to increase inclusive opportunities really needs to start with this strong focus on shifting these attitudes and beliefs, and really being intentional. So that might look like having an atmosphere that's welcoming, respectful, and accepting of all kids, kids with disabilities, kids without disabilities, and their families. Having that mission statement be visible and really reflecting the value of all kids and families. And really providing a natural environment with typical peers in which both groups are learning together. The second indicator is, does the administration and staff have an inclusive attitude and spirit? So part of this is around the language that we use. Person first language, when appropriate, which I'll get to in a second, really emphasizes the person and not the label. So we're thinking about what the child has, not what the child is. So an example is, I would not say Tia is special ed, or she's a special ed kid. I would say Tia receives special education services. And there's the asterisk there about when appropriate, because we always want to default to how an individual with a disability would prefer to be called. So for an example, many people on the autism spectrum actually prefer to be called autistic as opposed to a person with autism. So sometimes we're going to use people first language, but the rule of thumb is really to respect people and their preferences and listen to families. Another piece of this is that kids are included in conversations. Teachers are answering questions as they come up, and we're giving responses to kids. We're not kind of ignoring them. So again, really, this doesn't sound like rocket science. It's very in line with those key indicators of successful early childhood programs. And we're always going to be advocates, right? We're advocating for inclusion by educating all of our families about the benefit of inclusion for everybody. The third benchmark is, do you have a consistent and ongoing system for family involvement? So this is not just going to be that one and done time that we have an open house. We want something ongoing. We're encouraging parent participation. We are communicating with families. We're not just communicating to families. It's going both ways. We really want to work with families and find out what's the best method of communication. Do they like to have kind of that notebook that goes back and forth? Are they more of a texter, a phone person, in-person person when it's safe? So really thinking about that and always commenting on strengths, right? Conferences are scheduled at least once a year, I would say more than that, and definitely available upon request, and really having that open door policy. Is team planning incorporated into research-based curriculum? So the curriculum that we're using for our kiddos with disabilities should be the same curriculum that we're using for our kiddos without disabilities. So we want to follow that same criteria for our kids who are typically developing. And we have to have classroom teams plan together on how to really look at that curriculum and perhaps, if necessary, provide some adaptations and modifications to meet the needs of any of kiddos that need that. Again, best practice in early childhood, having a schedule that's balanced with some structured activities, some child-directed activities, hands-on learning, outdoor and indoor time. And also, similarly, thinking about large and small group and individual time when needed. And having the right tools in the classroom, and visuals are so important for all kids that are our littles, all preschoolers. And team is a word you'll see a lot, right? We can't do this alone. We really need to make sure everyone has access to all the same information, and we're including all of the key players in our meetings and in our ongoing conversations and problem solving. Are you collaborating and communicating with other agencies and community partners? Really maintaining that communication between districts and community agencies, because we'll talk a lot about how early childhood doesn't just happen within a district, doesn't just happen within childcare settings. Early childhood settings are happening across the board, so it's imperative that we are really working on our communication structures and our collaboration processes. Just thinking about ways for additional support. We might collaborate with churches or libraries or parks for summer programs and recreation programs. And providing experiences for all kids within the community to really just learn about the world and provide families ideas for where to take their child. Another indicator of high quality inclusive early childhood program is thinking about the IEP, and is the IEP driving instruction for the child with a disability? We know that IEP goals and objective updates are shared with parents and everyone who works with that child at least 3 times a year. Again, I would say more often. Functional goals are written and are age appropriate. Lack of toilet training is not something that keeps a kiddo from being accepted into a program. Toilet training is provided if it's part of a child's IEP. We don't want to create barriers to prevent kids' access to the general education, to their peers, and to the curriculum. And again, activities should be child-centered and teacher-directed. There's a balance, and then kiddos' goals need to be embedded into the activities that are happening daily in the classroom, and thinking about activities that that child enjoys. Another indicator or benchmark, are you integrating service delivery into the daily schedule? So services like OT, PT, speech should, whenever possible, the goal is that they are integrated into the classrooms, that those therapists really embed the goals in the daily schedule and incorporate the peers in the classroom in the activities. So we want this to happen in the classroom, not in a separate setting. This helps kids really generalize what they're working on with those service providers. Classroom teams should follow up with the goals designed by the therapist and communicate and collaborate with those providers. And always make sure that there's enough materials for a variety of planned activities. Again, thinking about when we talked about supports, and we talked about that system that's really undergirding all of everything that we're trying to do for early childhood inclusion. Is there a consistent and ongoing system for staff development? So really thinking through your scheduling for this, having time for staff to actually plan for their activities and to plan for what they're doing for students with disabilities and IEP meetings, to plan for meeting together as a team. And then having professional development, when staff are offered training for a whole year on the same topic, it really provides the trainer numerous opportunities to teach the concept in a variety of ways, to maybe the whole staff, to focus groups, to individual trainings, and to do things like consultation and coaching. And this approach really benefits all learning styles and gives the staff the time to reflect on the practices and then have the assurance that that person, that coach or consultant, will be there to support them through the process. And then providing that training to all staff. So not having a training that's just for your special education teachers or just for your OT/PT folks or just for your GE, general education folks, but really making sure that everyone has access. All of the teaching teams have access to the same training. Do the teachers have the tools and strategies for addressing issues of disability and inclusion? So kind of surface level, just making sure that we're introducing disability awareness by children's books and puppets and dolls and photos that really represent everyone in our community. And, you know, we might not even have a kiddo in our classroom with a disability, but we should always be incorporating this into our environment and into the curriculum. Having all the children explore the equipment used by the kids that have disabilities, because we know kids are going to be curious, and we don't want to say, no, don't touch that, that's only for Carrie, because that creates some sort of a stigma. And we really want to make sure we are just having access and supporting that equal opportunity for everyone, not making it a weird thing, if that makes sense. If we're doing buddies is a great way to help kids get to know each other and support each other, but we need to be mindful that the child with a disability shouldn't be the one who's always like getting the help. The child with a disability can definitely be the one in the buddy relationship who is helping the other child. So really thinking about that equity in the classroom. And last but not least, is there a comprehensive system for evaluating the effectiveness of the program? So evaluation should be completed and analyzed annually by parents and by staff. We want everyone's input. There should be training for staff and parents that come from their choices, right? We want to give them some input in this. Evaluation of community perceptions of inclusion should be included and used as that basis for awareness raising and education, because we don't know what we don't know, right? So we want to find out what our community is thinking and get input from them. And evaluation of the communication approach, thinking about that collaborative relationship and for how the program really assists with resources and supports for the child in that typical environment. So always really checking in and looking at our data to see where we are and to inform where we're headed. Again, a big overview, and there's other indicators that we will share with you that you can look at. But again, a key takeaway is program readiness is thinking about where you are as a program. Are you already implementing indicators for high quality early childhood programs? So now let's talk about some supports. So you want to work on your program. You want to increase inclusive opportunities. There's a few local organizations that can help you do that. And hi, we're one of them. So South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion, our mission is to increase inclusive opportunities and school readiness for preschool children with IEPs to lead to more positive outcomes for kids and families. And a little bit about us. We are sort of a cross-sector collaborative process that has assisted school districts in increasing those inclusive opportunities. And we've worked with over 40 districts in just about 5 years, and those districts are all across our state. Those districts received free technical assistance to really develop cross-sector leadership teams to create and execute an implementation plan to ensure that preschool kids have access to and are able to meaningfully participate in the general education curriculum alongside their peers. And exciting news, we're coming up on a new contract with the South Carolina Department of Ed, and our program will continue to provide the necessary resources to support meaningful and lasting changes at the local level to expand inclusive opportunities for kids with disabilities. And we will also reinforce the Office of Special Ed Services, Early Childhood, and System of Tiered Technical Assistance Framework. So we will be here to support you. So a little bit about how we can help you. So we have lots of resources and support to facilitate district planning to increase those opportunities. So we'll get into this momentarily, but we have tools that are readily available to anyone to really analyze your district's strengths and their needs related to preschool inclusion, and then to engage in some backward planning to create a 5-year strategic plan to increase inclusive opportunities. We also have some supports to help you with forming that district level cross-sector community preschool inclusion leadership team. I'm going to get to that in a second. We know that early childhood inclusion doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen within the district walls. And we know that to be successful, it requires this community-wide partnership. So we've worked with lots of districts to support these cross-collaborative partnerships and relationships. And we can connect you to other districts who might be doing similar work. We can help connect you to potential partners and childcare programs. And like I mentioned, Heather also works she's the director of the South Carolina Childcare Inclusion Collaborative. So if there are other supports that your maybe the childcare centers in your community are asking for, we can find the right folks to connect you with. We provide, like I've mentioned, a variety of professional development opportunities in virtual and face-to-face formats when appropriate to increase the use of evidence-based practices by providers who work with preschool children with disabilities. Lots of training and topics that we cover. We can talk about really understanding the general rationale for inclusion, the process for determining LRE for young kiddos, making those accommodations and modifications to support the needs of kids with disabilities, supporting social and emotional development of young children and pyramid model practices, which we'll talk a little bit more about in tomorrow's session, and models to support early childhood inclusion, like special education itinerant teaching. So if you have questions about those opportunities, you can let us know. You can check out our website as well. And tiered technical assistance. So universal support, all of those professional development opportunities, as I've talked about. We have resources on our website, a newsletter, etc. And then we also offer some targeted and intensive support for districts that are in need of specialized assistance to enhance their early childhood programming to support the implementation of practices that will increase inclusive opportunities for kids with disabilities. In the past, this was awarded on an application-based process, but we'll be shifting in the coming months to support districts with their root cause analysis findings as part of the Office of Special Ed Services SOTA framework. So, planning tools. In a moment, I will walk you through some of those planning tools that we have on our website. But first, I just wanted to take a minute to address teaming. So, if you look at the policy statement that was put out, really addressing the remaining challenges and barriers to inclusion in early childhood programs and ensuring that kids with disabilities receive the individualized supports that they need to thrive requires that community-wide partnership that brings families and advocates and early childhood programs in schools together, right? Do you see a theme? We keep talking about partnerships. So we really help folks develop this team to address what they're working on. And team composition in general differs for the district teams that we've worked with as communities vary. We've found a few things, kind of helpful tips. We know that we need to have both an early childhood representative and a special education representative, because we can't work in silos. We need to come together. And we know that some critical participants are really that district early childhood education coordinator and the district early childhood special education coordinator. Team initiators don't have to necessarily be in that role, because again, districts look different. If I'm in a small district, I might wear multiple hats, right? And so my team might look a little different. It's kind of like me talking to myself and maybe another person. So we're not super prescriptive with that, because we really want to help local communities and districts build capacity to increase inclusive opportunities in their communities. So team initiators, again, don't have to have that type of role, but they do need to be empowered to initiate this leadership team. Then they don't have to remain the team leaders forever. They just have to have some level of empowerment to take this on. And then as far as who else should be on the team, best practice varies in the literature from about 8 to 15. We definitely wouldn't want a huge team, because then there's too many cooks in the kitchen. We want to keep that focused. So some of the things that we've found helpful, again, including a variety of stakeholders, making sure your teachers, your boots on the ground, somebody is there to represent what's actually happening in the classrooms. Administrators, somebody with kind of that access to the information and the people that can affect change and get things done, make recommendations that'll, kind of move to the next level. And then really the folks who are well-versed in your child find processes. So there's some suggested participants that we've also put here, but again, by no means is this an exhaustive list. These are just folks that have participated on teams that we've worked with. And it is really important to think about who in the community can help you plan for preschool inclusion. Do you have Head Start in your community? Do you have many community childcare programs? I'm sure you do. Thinking about how can I get those folks together? Who can come to this team to represent that particular group of stakeholders? Any questions about that? I know this is a lot of information in a small amount of time. Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears to show you a little bit about the tools. You can still see my screen, right? Okay. So to access the tools.
Yep, we still see it, Carrie.
Thanks. It's always hard when you're looking at two different screens to make sure you're not sharing the wrong thing. You're going to go to scpartnershipsforinclusion.org. This is our homepage. And up here, sort of at the top-ish, you'll see resources. And then if you just hover over that and you scroll down to the last piece, you'll see planning tools. You'll click on that and it'll give you just some information about how the tools have been designed to really provide a framework for discussion that's promoting that partnership to benefit young kids with disabilities and their families. So the first place I would tell you to go is to really look at the preschool inclusion self-assessment tool, and then the accompanied facilitator's guide, which will really give you some questions to help guide that conversation. So here's what the tool looks like. Bear with the slow internet. I promise it will load. I practiced before. Here you go. Here's the tool. You can open it in Adobe. You can download it so you have it. It's a fillable form, so you can type into it. I know if you've worked with us in the past, it took us a little while to get these fillable forms, but we've got them for you. So this way you can really collaborate together on the tool. And using this tool, along with the facilitator's guide, which, you know what, I'm going to pull that up just so we can look at that as well. So this is not fillable because it's not meant to be written in. It's really just whoever you decide is going to be the facilitator of the conversation at that day. And this is not going to take one sitting or one day to complete. It'll be completed over time, which is why you have a team, and then you decide with your team kind of how you're going to structure things. What are your protocols? How often are you meeting, etc. The facilitator will really look at the tool and look at the questions. If you're kind of like, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure that we receive Child Find from Head Start, right? Then you might ask like, well, what's the process for the referrals? How many do we typically receive annually? So this is just going to help guide you when you're kind of stuck on an item. So you're going to use that. And again, you'll use those two tools with your team to reflect on past experiences working together to provide services to kids and families. And the self-assessment tool really has a couple areas of reflection: access to services, because we've talked about access. So when you go through and you look at all the items in this section, you're really thinking about your Child Find referrals and your procedures, as well as your placement options for preschool kids in your district. And you'd go through, and the way we've done it is a yes, no, but we thought about a Likert scale, but it's more, again, to have a discussion. So what does it really look like? Do you think it's successful? How do you quantify that? And what comments or other thoughts do you have about it? So this is not meant kind of as an evaluative tool where you're going to check off like, perfect, I've got this. It's more for that discussion to kind of help drive your planning and what's next. The other next piece to the document is about collaboration. So that's thinking about how your special education staff, your general early childhood staff, and families really communicate and coordinate various pieces throughout the day and various parts that are necessary components to early childhood and early childhood special education, busing, IEP, meetings. And then the next section is about meaningful participation, because we talked about how participation is an indicator for early childhood inclusive practices. So this is how your programs are using South Carolina's early learning standards, how the IEP is being implemented across programs, those types of questions. And then the last section is about supports for inclusion. So again, that's about that administrative component, and then your professional development component. So thinking about those written policies, your vision and mission statements, your scheduling for staff planning and professional development. So that's all on here, as well as thinking about your program configuration. So where do all the kiddos receive services? How many classrooms for early childhood does your district have? What do those programs look like? What other settings might kids receive early childhood special education services? So you would use this tool to really just kind of get a layout and discuss where you've been. And again, the facilitator's guide just has guiding questions for you. And then as you work through the assessment tool, then we have the path planning tool. And I know some people are on the call that might have worked with us. Other folks may have worked with TASC, the Transition Alliance of South Carolina. And this is really a process that they've been using for years before us as they support post-secondary transition of young adults with disabilities. And they allowed us to adapt this tool and really think about how we might make some changes to reflect the early childhood community. So with your team, there are some guiding questions, and you would do some backwards planning where you first identify really what's your big dream, what's your 5-year plan, where do you see your program in 5 years, what realistic services and procedures would support inclusion in the district, and you would have this conversation with your team in dreaming big. Now, some folks have said that's kind of hard to do before we do this step, identifying how things currently operate now, which is why we have found that a lot of teams like to do the self-assessment tool to really understand where they are before they can dream big. But again, You might already have your vision, and then you're going to do it a little bit differently than other folks might do it. Step 2 is generating that vision for 1 year. So thinking about, okay, now I have my big goal for where I want the program to be in 5 years, but what can we reasonably expect to accomplish within 1 year? So then you have your year benchmarks. You're going to think about who on the team is responsible. When is this happening? And a lot of times, this will shift. You might set a date, but then as you go through the plans, that's going to shift, and that's okay. But it's so important to really identify, all right, let's make this an actionable item. Let's say when is the goal for this and who is responsible for it, so that if we get to it and we realize that plans have shifted, that's okay. We want to make this a living document and update it as we go. And that leads us to who needs to be enrolled. Thinking about that team, we might start and maybe we have 2 folks who are starting this endeavor, or maybe there's a few more, but it's still so important to think about who is at the table and who's not at the table that might, that should be. So really thinking about people to kind of enroll in this process. Always thinking about our strengths, because we're going to build on the strengths that we have. And then this is where we're going to kind of break it on down. We have our 5-year vision, our 1-year benchmark, and then we want to break that down to think about, okay, what can we accomplish in 6 months that are going to help us get to that 1-year mark or that 5-year vision? And then what's going to happen in a month, right? What are some concrete action steps that we can accomplish before maybe we have our next team meeting next month? And then your very first step. So we always encourage, when teams get started on this, the first time you really dive into this, think through, what are you going to do within a week or 3 days? What's going to happen? What are your initial steps? Maybe it's setting your kind of team schedule, knowing that if you're going to really get this done, you have to get something on the calendar. So we're going to meet monthly, the last Thursday of the month during lunch, whenever it works for you all. Or maybe it's sending out that doodle poll to get everybody's availability, so then you can work on setting up the schedule. So some of this will be very focused on early childhood inclusive kind of practices and programming, and some of this will be focused on kind of the procedural and teamwork aspects of it, to make sure that you are continually meeting and working on your action items, so that there are protocols and processes put in place, so that this isn't like, oh, we met that one time and we started something and then we didn't follow through with it, so it didn't live and we didn't make progress towards our goals. Now, if you've worked with us before, maybe it was a couple months ago, or maybe it was a couple years ago, but that you already have a path plan, and that you have existing team members that worked on that plan that are still involved and still meeting. Maybe you haven't communicated with Skippy, but that you still have this inclusion team for early childhood, then you might decide to use the revised process and the abbreviated plan. So any districts that work with us, we want you to complete up an initial plan, but we always encourage you to go back to that plan at least annually to look at your progress and to make updates again. So this can be a process that lives, and it's not like, oh, where's that plan that I wrote 4 years ago and I haven't seen? And I think if you decide that you make these into a Google document, or you have some other method to make it live and make it easily accessible amongst the members of your team, then whatever works for you all is the best process to use. But again, here's just some guidance for what we're calling more veteran or established teams. So did you previously attend a strategic planning event with us, right? We're calling them District Leadership Day. Did you already create a path plan? Did your team meet at least 6 times? And do you have team members who have participated for at least 6 months? Because if your district has gone through some changes, which a lot of districts have, and that's okay, if you know that most of the people around, or they weren't around then you're going to treat yourself like a new team, because if everybody's new, then it is a new team, right? But you would use this to kind of go through it. It's an abbreviated process. And then there's an abbreviated plan that you can use. So it looks a little bit different. It's a little more short and to the point. So you put your vision, you put your team members, and are they confirmed? Because I know a lot of teams that I participate on or that I lead, we've got that list, but are they a confirmed member? Do they attend all of the meetings? Are they participating? Or are they just kind of receiving the email? So you as a team really think about what that looks like. And if you've ever attended any of our sessions with Dr. Jane Everson, who is an expert in kind of the teaming science of things, she'll talk about how it's so important to make sure that people are committed and confirmed, right? It's not about just kind of sending a representative, it's making sure that they can be there at those meetings consistently. And if they can't, then that's okay, but maybe they're on a separate committee. Maybe things are structured a little bit differently because you want the core people to be able to really commit to this process. Any questions about that? See that we have about 10 minutes left. So those are really the tools that we've used. We're constantly looking at the planning tools and thinking about how we might tweak things and develop additional tools to support folks that are really looking at increasing inclusive opportunities. So these are just some of the references and the resources. That joint position statement, I definitely would check it out if you haven't already. DEC, or the Division for Early Childhood, they have recommended practices that are also excellent to look at when you're looking at your early childhood programming. First steps to preschool inclusion, how to jumpstart your program-wide plan, which we'll talk about in a second as well. And then if you're not familiar with ECTA, that's the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. It's a federally funded technical assistance center, and they have a lot of resources about early childhood inclusion. I've pulled out a few. You can basically go to this one, their topics on inclusion, and it'll break out to a whole bunch of tools, to policy and positions statements, to funding, to research. And they've also collaboratively worked with NCPMI, which is the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations, and they are currently developing early care and education environment indicators and elements for high quality inclusion. So I would definitely recommend checking this out as well, because it aligns with a lot of what I've already talked about, and it just gives some more suggestions of kind of benchmarks within the benchmarks when we're talking about working with community partnerships and working with families and addressing social and emotional needs in the classroom. So that's another resource that I would definitely recommend. Are there any questions? That felt like kind of like a drive-by of early childhood inclusion and what Skippy has to offer. You know, Heather's been looking at the chat and she's been looking at Q&A. I'm not sure if there's anything in there.
Not yet, Carrie. I think that those early childhood indicators that Carrie was just talking about are relatively new. They're in the process of being validated and all of that kind of stuff, but they're worth kind of taking a look at and keeping an eye on the types of resources they might add to support implementation of those. And we do have a question about whether or not this is recorded. Yes, it is recorded, and it will be posted on the Skippy YouTube channel, which is linked to our Skippy page.
Yeah.
Right, Carrie?
Yep.
And you can also subscribe to that YouTube channel. So if anything new pops up, then you'll know.
Yes.
And Janice is asking, how do you request training for teaching staff?
Good question. So any requests for training or support, you can reach out to me here. I'll just skip ahead. I'll remember to go back to that. You would go to our website. So again, scpartnershipsforinclusion.org. You can go up here to contact us and fill out a form. And then I'll make sure I look at it. And if it is a request that I think, maybe one of our partner agencies would really be most appropriate for this, then I will connect with them. But either way, I will get back to whoever sends it to us. You can also email us at scpi@mailbox.sc.edu, Skippy. Those are the two primary ways to request training. I would definitely say to check out our website to learn more about the program and any upcoming training events and opportunities. Like Heather mentioned, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which you'll get updates and alerts on training opportunities that we provide and other opportunities around the state that we'd like to share. We have a Facebook, so you can keep track of us on Facebook, and again, resources that we might share and that we might share from other great organizations locally or nationally. Here's the YouTube, so it's right there. There's lots of workshops, and this one will be housed on there, if not tomorrow, then early next week. But I'd say if you are looking for other trainings, check out the recorded ones we have. We have some on Tier 1 universal strategies. We have some for working with partners, effective communication and problem solving. So there's quite a few on there. Tomorrow we'll be doing a session to help you learn more about the pyramid model and how you can support young children's social and emotional development in inclusive settings. So I think I answered your question. I see that we have about 4 minutes left. Momentarily, I will pop up an evaluation, so please make sure that you stay on to complete that evaluation. It's just 4 questions. But I did want to take a second that 25 participants from this webinar will be randomly selected to receive this valuable resource. And it's looking like we have 25 folks on the call right now, so there's a good chance that all of you might. So really the criteria was, did you register? Are you watching the webinar in its entirety through the registration link that was provided to you? And are you completing an evaluation? So make sure you complete that evaluation. And this First Steps to Preschool Inclusion is an introductory guide that gathers everything you need to know to launch an inclusive early childhood program and collaborate with staff and parents to make it a success. It's a great tool for leaders in early childhood programs. So again, make sure you complete the evaluation link that'll pop up momentarily. And I will email winners by next week, and then just make sure to reply back promptly to provide the shipping information so we know where to send it to. So I'm going to leave this up, and I am going to pop up the evaluation. So you should see that evaluation on your screen. If you'll just take a minute to provide feedback, we really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you everyone for your time this morning. We hope that we see you tomorrow if you're able to attend to learn more about the pyramid model and some local resources to help you implement the model. If you're not able to attend, that session will also be recorded and then housed on our YouTube channel, which if you're not well versed in YouTube, you can just access that by coming to our website. Thanks, everybody. I'm looking at the chat now. I figured out how to open it up and see all the things. So I appreciate you all tuning in, and I'm glad that it was informative. If you have questions or if you have other thoughts, or you're like, hey, we're looking at this self-assessment or we're starting to do this plan and we have some questions, we want some support, please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Looks like almost everyone completed the evaluation. Like I said, you all have a good chance of getting that resource. I have it under here. It's currently propping up the laptop.